The first thing Noah noticed was the silence. Deep, unnatural silence. No hum of electricity, no faint echoes of life. Just an empty void. He blinked, his head throbbing as his eyes adjusted to the dim, bluish light around him. The last thing he remembered was driving home late at night, headlights cutting through the fog. And then nothing. Have you ever woken up somewhere you don't recognize? Somewhere that feels wrong? Noah sat up slowly, his body heavy and sluggish. The ground beneath him wasn't solid. It felt like a strange, rubbery material that pulsed faintly under his touch. The walls around him curved inward, like he was inside a giant sphere. Everything glowed faintly, a cold light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once. He wasn't alone. Across the room, if you could call it that, a woman sat curled up, clutching her knees to her chest. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and filled with terror. "Where are we?" Noah asked, his voice cracking. She looked at him, her lips trembling. I don't know. I was just walking my dog, and then I was here." Noah's heart raced. He stood up, swaying slightly. His body felt strange, as if gravity worked differently here. He reached out to touch the wall, and it rippled under his hand like water. "We have to get out of here," he said, more to himself than to her. "There's no way out," she whispered. "I've tried. It's like this place is alive." Noah frowned. Alive? That couldn't be possible. Could it? He walked toward what looked like a doorway, though it had no handle, no seams. Just a faint outline in the wall. As he approached, the outline brightened, and the wall began to dissolve, revealing a long, narrow corridor. The woman gasped, scrambling to her feet. "How did you do that?" she asked. Noah shook his head. "I didn't do anything. It just opened." They stepped into the corridor cautiously. The air felt heavier here, and a low vibration hummed beneath their feet. The walls seemed to shift and shimmer, as though the entire ship, if that's what this was alive and breathing. "Do you hear that?" Noah asked. The woman nodded. "It's coming from ahead." They followed the sound, a deep, rhythmic thrum that grew louder with every step. The corridor twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the heart of the ship. Occasionally, the walls would ripple, and shapes would press against them from the other side. Shapes that weren't human. What would you have done? Turned back? Kept going? Noah didn't know what drove him forward. Curiosity? Fear? Or maybe it was the feeling that something terrible would happen if they stayed still. Finally, they reached a large chamber. It was massive, stretching so far that the other end disappeared into darkness. In the center of the room was a pulsating orb, suspended in midair. It radiated light and heat, casting strange, shifting shadows on the walls. "What is that?" the woman whispered. "I don't know," Noah said, "but I think it's watching us." The orb pulsed faster, brighter, as if responding to his words. Then, without warning, it emitted a high-pitched sound that made them both cover their ears. The floor beneath them began to shift, rising and falling like waves. The walls shimmered, and the shapes from earlier became clearer. Tall, thin figures with elongated limbs and featureless faces pressed against the walls, their forms writhing and stretching. "We need to leave," the woman said, panic in her voice. "Go where?" Noah asked. Before she could answer, the floor split open beneath them. They fell, tumbling into darkness, the air rushing past them. When they hit the ground, it wasn't hard but soft and sticky. Noah struggled to stand, his hands sinking into the substance. They were in another chamber, smaller but more horrifying. The walls were covered in what looked like cocoons, each one glowing faintly. Inside the cocoons, he could see people. Their faces were frozen in expressions of fear and pain, their bodies suspended in some kind of liquid. "What is this place?" the woman whispered, tears streaming down her face. Noah didn't answer. He couldn't. He was too busy staring at one of the cocoons. Inside was someone he recognized. Himself. How is that possible? How could he be here and there at the same time? He reached out to touch the cocoon, but as his fingers made contact, the entire chamber lit up. The walls rippled, and a loud, inhuman voice filled the space. "You do not belong here." The voice wasn't speaking in words but directly into their minds. Noah's head felt like it was splitting open. He fell to his knees, clutching his head. The woman screamed, but her voice was drowned out by the sound. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the voice stopped. The room went dark. When the lights came back on, the cocoons were gone. The woman was gone. Noah was alone. "Hello," he called out, his voice echoing. There was no answer. The silence returned, heavier than before. He tried to move, but his body wouldn't respond. He looked down and realized that the floor was creeping up his legs, binding him in place. Panic set in. He struggled, but the more he moved, the faster the substance climbed. Within seconds, it had reached his chest. He screamed as it covered his face, pulling him into darkness. When he opened his eyes, he was back in his car. The headlights illuminated the road ahead, the fog thick around him. For a moment, he thought it had all been a dream, but then he looked at his hands. They were covered in the same sticky substance from the ship. His phone buzzed. He picked it up with shaking hands. A single message flashed on the screen. "You're not alone." Noah threw the phone onto the passenger seat, his heart racing. He pressed down on the gas pedal, desperate to get home. But as he drove, the fog grew thicker. Shapes appeared in the mist, tall and thin with elongated limbs. They weren't on the road. They were in his car. The last thing Noah heard was the sound of his own scream. Do you think you'd survive if it happened to you? If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to my channel for more terrifying tales.